Have you ever looked at a map of the Roman Empire at its peak? It's a vast, sprawling superpower, stretching from the deserts of Syria to the rainy shores of Britain. But there's a curious little chunk missing right at the top. A rugged, wild land that Rome, for all its might, never fully managed to subdue. Talking about Scotland, or as the Romans called it, Caledonia. Why? Why could this global superpower conquer empires and continents, but draw the line at the Scottish Highlands? Was it the weather? The fierce warriors? Or something else entirely? Today we remarching north of Hadrian's Wall to uncover the real reasons why the Roman Empire never conquered Scotland. Let's set the scene. It's the 1st century AD, the Roman legions. The most formidable fighting force in the ancient world have successfully conquered what we now know as England and Wales. They look north and see a land of misty mountains, dense forests, and boggy moors. And living in this land are tribes the Romans lumped together under the name Caledonians. These weren't a unified nation, but a collection of fierce, independent peoples. The Romans saw them as barbarians, a common term they used for anyone outside their Greco-Roman world. But these were no simple savages. They were skilled warriors, deeply connected to their land, and they would prove to be a persistent, painful thorn in the side of the empire. The first major attempt to push into Caledonia was led by the governor, Gnaeus Julius Agricola, around 80 AD. He was a brilliant general, and his campaign was initially a huge success. He marched his legions deep into modern-day Scotland, building forts and roads as he went. The climax of his campaign was the Battle of Mons Graupius. According to the Roman historian Tacitus, who also happened to be Agricola's son-in-law, the Romans faced a massive Caledonian army. The Caledonian chieftain, Calgacus, is said to have given a rousing speech, famously declaring that the Romans create a desert and call it peace. Despite their bravery, the Caledonians were outmatched by Roman discipline and tactics. It was a decisive Roman victory. Thousands of Caledonians were lost, and it seemed like the conquest of the whole island was finally within reach. But then, something strange happened. Rome pulled back. Just as victory seemed assured, Agricola was recalled to Rome, and the legions began to withdraw from their northernmost positions. Why? The official reason is murky, but it likely came down to imperial priorities. At the same time, trouble was brewing on other, more strategically important frontiers of the empire. Like the Danube River, the Emperor Domitian probably looked at the situation and made a cold calculation. Holding Caledonia would require a huge, permanent garrison of troops he desperately needed elsewhere to defend more valuable territories. Caledonia had no major cities, no vast fields of taxable grain, and no easily exploitable mineral wealth that Rome didn't already have elsewhere. So, was the cost of subduing these fierce tribes and garrisoning this rugged, poor land worth the effort? The answer from Rome was a resounding no. It was a classic case of cost-benefit analysis. The potential gains just didn't justify the massive ongoing expense in blood and treasure. This decision led to one of the most famous structures in history, Hadrian's Wall. Around the year 122 AD, the Emperor Hadrian visited Britain. He saw the situation and decided on a policy of consolidation, not expansion. Instead of trying to conquer the north, he would build a massive wall, a physical barrier marking the edge of the Roman world. Hadrian's Wall was an incredible feat of engineering. Stretching 73 miles from coast to coast, complete with forts, mile castles, and turrets, it wasn't just a wall to keep people out. It was a heavily controlled border. It allowed the Romans to manage trade, levy taxes on goods crossing the frontier, and project power without overcommitting their forces. It was a clear statement, this far and no further. The empire was defining its limits. Of course, that wasn't the end of the story. A couple of decades later, Hadrian's successor, Antoninus Pius, tried again. He pushed north and built another wall, the Antonine Wall, across the narrowest part of Scotland. It was a turf wall, less imposing than Hadrian's, and it represented another brief attempt at controlling the Scottish lowlands. But this occupation was even shorter-lived. The Romans held the Antonine Wall for only about 20 years before abandoning it and retreating back to the security of Hadrian's Wall. The constant raids from the northern tribes, the logistical nightmare of supplying the forts, and the sheer drain on manpower proved too much. This retreat confirmed the earlier decision. Caledonia was simply not worth the trouble. So let's talk more about the Caledonians themselves. One of the biggest challenges for the Romans was the type of warfare they faced. The Roman army was a machine built for decisive set-piece battles on open ground. They excelled at crushing other organized armies. But that's not how the Caledonians fought. They were masters of their own terrain. They used guerrilla tactics, hit-and-run raids, ambushes, in dense forests and boggy terrain, and then melting away into the hills where the heavily armored Roman legions couldn't easily follow. They might lose a major battle like Mons Graupius, but they could never be truly pinned down and annihilated. For the Romans, it was like trying to punch smoke. This constant low-level warfare was exhausting, demoralizing, and incredibly costly for the occupying forces. It bled the legions dry, one small raid at a time, and we can't ignore the environment. Scotland is not Italy. It's the rugged mountains, the unpredictable weather, the rain, the cold. The Midgezit was a logistical nightmare for an army that relied on well-maintained supply lines, moving thousands of soldiers and keeping them fed, clothed, and equipped in such a challenging landscape was a monumental task. The Roman road network, so effective elsewhere, was harder to build and maintain in the Scottish Highlands. Every supply convoy was a potential target for ambush. The land itself fought against the Romans just as fiercely as the people did. For the individual Roman soldier from Spain or North Africa stationed in a damp, cold fort on the edge of the known world, it must have felt like a truly miserable alien posting. Ultimately, the story of Rome and Scotland is a fascinating lesson in the limits of power. It wasn't that Rome couldn't have conquered Scotland. If the emperor had been willing to throw enough money, enough legions, and enough time at the problem, they probably could have eventually crushed all resistance and occupied the entire island. But they chose not to. The conquest of Caledonia failed the ultimate Roman test. It wasn't profitable. It offered little strategic or economic reward for an enormous and unending military commitment. The Romans were pragmatic above all else. They looked at the fierce tribes, the brutal terrain, and the relentless guerrilla warfare, and they made a business decision. They built a wall and focused their resources elsewhere. And so, Caledonia remained unconquered, a land of myth and legend just beyond the edge of the eagle's reach, preserving a unique culture that would go on to shape the nation of Scotland. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back in time. If you enjoyed this exploration of Roman history, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you don't miss our next adventure. Let me know in the comments what other historical mysteries you'd like to see us tackle. Until next time, stay curious.